without any further ado, Mayor Lucas, thank you so much for making time to spend with our students and our larger EMBA community. We've actually gotten to talk a couple of times in person, and John Stam is one of my favorite people in Kansas City. I know he's your chief of staff, and so thank you for making time to do this today. So I'll turn it over to you, Mayor.
Well, good morning, everybody, and it is an honor to be with all of you. I hope you can all hear me all right, and I like a good morning Zoom because nobody's too distracted yet, so I appreciate the opportunity. The topic today relates to business and how we can sustain, in some ways, Kansas City's business and encourage further growth in the era of COVID-19. But I will start a little more broadly. First, I want to thank my friend Nate Hogan for helping us get this arranged. It is an honor and a real treat to visit with a group as distinguished as this one. And more than anything, I'm excited to hear questions a bit later. What a time to be mayor. So as you all know, I became mayor about a year and a month ago. In the first several months, we dealt with what seemed like old line issues, potholes, and all that sort of stuff, which are still a problem, by the way. I haven't forgotten. But since that point, as we've seen, we saw COVID-19 come to our shores in the United States, really impacting the entire world. And we saw probably one of the more challenging decisions I hope I ever make, not just in government, but in life. And that was when we saw the tragic number of deaths, the spread of COVID-19, particularly in New York City, on the West Coast, and then we saw it come closer in places like New Orleans, St. Louis, Detroit, when we made the decision to issue a stay-at-home order. You know, the interesting thing, first of all, was, as you may remember in the time, late February, early March, usually Kansas City is getting ready to make lots of money off of the Big 12 tournament, NCAA basketball that comes to Sprint Center, and in many ways helps us pay off our many loans and obligations on the Sprint Center, the Power and Light District, et cetera. We saw fairly early on that the Big 12 tournament couldn't go on. And you may think that the toughest decision was actually shutting down large events like NCAA basketball games in the Big 12 tournament. But for me, when we issued our first order that limited events, I believe to about 100 people, the largest number of calls came from wedding planners and angry brides of greater Kansas City. You know, it's one thing to show off a big conference, it's another to ruin a wedding that someone was planning for a year and a half. And so we went through that. We saw in some ways that our remedies needed to be even more extensive, and then issued a stay-at-home order. Almost from the beginning, I had concern about what it means to Kansas City's businesses and businesses around the region. There are many that may be able to survive, and indeed the versatility of our businesses was nothing short of amazing. The examples you hear a lot about are restaurants that went to dine out, bars that went to carry away for drinks. You saw a lot of other folks go virtual and online with provision of services. I actually myself went to a telehealth appointment this morning, which is all the more frequent and frankly a lot more convenient in some ways. But there were many others that couldn't. Disproportionately, minority-owned businesses in East Kansas City ran into a number of challenges. Buildings in South Kansas City, in the Northland, kind of those where you can't just switch to a law firm doing everything via email anyway, but instead needing people to come into your business and being a part of it was a real challenge. And so we almost instantly got to work on a small business grant program. The problem was we needed money to do it. We found $500,000 to do it, which in a city of 505,000 people is not enough. We then found more funding, at least to the Northland of Kansas City, through the nature of politics. That was a little bit harder to find in Jackson County. And we've continued to have those battles. But those are kind of small potatoes. As I continue through my chronological steps, so we're dealing with these, we're seeing there's going to be this big impact. We actually talk about reopening the economy because for some reason America decided in April, oh, what the heck, you know, we need to go outside again. And so that was when the conversation began, right or wrong. It kind of came from Washington through Jefferson City and on to us. But then we ran into, I think, a very important moment as it relates to protests. addressing long-standing racial issues. And if you want a little heart-to-heart just between me and you, it's just us here, right? You know, that was probably when I said, you know, okay, everything's going crazy this year. Because dealing with a global pandemic, in addition to, I think, very necessary and essential racial reconciliation conversations, protests in our city, the shuttering of the Country Club Plaza for about a week and a half, are the sorts of things that I did not expect to run into as mayor. Not to mention then you have the same kind of continuing issues of violent crime in Kansas City, educational challenges in Kansas City, and I think our ongoing battles with the state of Missouri to sometimes recognize that economic development isn't just big real estate incentives. And it's really why I love visiting with a group like yours, because while I love a giant factory as much as the next guy, or a huge incentive for a headquarters relocation, there is so much more that we need to do to stimulate Missouri businesses. So we've continued to address all of that. And so I've had a few goals, which I think probably aren't too different than what you see in your businesses and your organizations. Goal one is to stabilize the situations that we're in. We need to, and we've needed to through City Hall, let people know that those basics of government that you still expect will continue to happen. We will continue to have public works. We'll continue to collect the Kansas City earnings tax. We'll continue to, I think, take important steps to deliver the basic and core services that Kansas Cityans can expect. The second step after stabilization is really to actually pick back up on, I think, the message of Kansas City's open for business, even if open means something different. And this is where I'm very different than the governor of Missouri in a lot of ways. What I would say is open for business doesn't just mean, hey, everybody, you know, maybe wear a dang on mask or maybe not. That's my best mid-mo talk, but come back inside to do something. Instead, I actually think it's important to say, explore businesses in a new and interesting and creative way. For example, this is actually dealing with one of our Kansas City, Missouri owned nonprofits. But the Kansas City Zoo has done amazing work in actually bringing lots of its lessons and tours online, right? Bringing that to a school group, bringing that to a class. And one of their more innovative fundraising approaches, because they can't do things like Jazoo and some of the other typical events. And this actually I learned about not from the zoo itself, but from talking to a 6-year-old who said, will you buy a snake for me? And I said, huh? And his parents said, yeah, the zoo will let you buy every animal there for some amount of money. And I think the snake costs $200, an elephant costs $5,000. And they're like, so will you give $50 to our kid's snake? And I was like, what an innovative fundraising idea, zoo, you know? And it was nice because then they send the young boy a certificate and he's very proud of his snake and he'll go back and visit it as soon as he can go back to the zoo, right? Those sorts of things. And I know you all can tell me lots of ways that we've been innovative. I think a role that we have as government is to, one, make it as easy as possible for you to find those innovative ways. And second, I do think, although we're not the Chamber of Commerce, which is good and bad sometimes, I think us marketing and sharing what our local businesses are doing is important. The traditional way of being a mayor or a governor or a city council member was showing up at your business with a giant pair of red scissors, right? We do the big ribbon cutting, we all shake hands, we have a lovely time, and then there are cookies and punch at the end. Well, how do we actually transition that celebration with cookies and punch to something different? To something where we're saying, through the use of social media, with all of us staring at our computers much longer than I think is normal these days, right? How do we actually say, all right, we are drawing attention to people, to businesses in a new and different and in some ways I was going to say not provocative, but in an evocative way, making up words. What do I mean by that? Something that evokes some sort of excitement, some energy, some attraction, and more than anything, even if you're not intrigued by the business model, something that gets you to say, that is really darn creative, and how can I replicate that? I don't have children myself, so, you know, I don't really need to buy a pet snake. I would probably just donate regardless. But that got me to think, all right, wow, how are there other ways that I as a mayor can message better with the community, can share, can create new forums for them, right? So that's sort of the important thing for us. What does this mean, though, for Kansas City long term? What is our future, and how do we get back to, I think, stimulating a business in a way necessary? Well, first things first. I had a call. I have to raise money as part of my job. Don't worry, this isn't a question for that. I'll save it later for my Baptist minister. Just $20 more and we can build the community center speech. But anyway, I was talking to somebody and they said, well, Mayor, I just feel like I can't get anything done at City Hall right now. It's been real complicated for me the last 4 months. And don't we all love having donors and customers? Because I said, yes, it's really just been tough for you, not literally everyone else. But no one necessarily cares. And so what I had to say, what we have to pivot on, whether you're dealing with parents or your customers or anyone, is how do we let them know that even if today service delivery is fundamentally different, that they will continue to receive very good services from us in the interim, and then long term, while back to normal is a cliche that perhaps isn't happening, but that frankly, the service that they expect and provide will be delivered, will be done. They'll be able to, if it's government working with businesses, make money in Kansas City. And if it's businesses working with customers, they'll be able to continue to receive that same service they expect later. It's how I can say, well, if I have a telehealth appointment, if there is some calamitous condition that I have, at some point later, they're going to have an opportunity for me to come in, get some treatment, or them send me something. And so for us in government, I think it's been important for us to share that not just is the stabilizing something that helps us now, but in the future. But the second is that it gives us a chance to lead kind of the competition and the battle among cities. No one likes to talk about battles among cities because we all want to be friends. But what I've always found necessary as businesses are thinking about where to locate or relocate or where to build and grow is that I say that Kansas City has as few barriers to entry as possible. And what that has meant for me is that this is a place where you want to be. It's something that it's a place that recognizes that how we actually work with our utilities, so that while you're working from home, right, you'll notice that there isn't the water outage, the power outage that we sometimes have actually in our neighborhood areas that too often exist in Kansas City. It's making sure that we continue to lobby in Jeff City to reverse, I think, the decision made by Governor Greitens in connection with support for angel investors and others, so that we can stimulate better investment in Missouri and in Kansas City. It's continuing to work with our senators, both in Missouri and Kansas, to recognize that all of our bio and agriculture industry investments are ones that actually can grow, particularly to support smaller businesses. And I think it continues to be a focus on how is it that we can, through our own procurement practices at Kansas City, and I remind you, Kansas City, Missouri itself has a roughly $1.7 billion budget. How do we, through our procurement practices, actually ensure that we're supporting businesses that have new and innovative approaches to how services are delivered, right? Our citizen satisfaction surveys, perhaps the classic approach to mail and door knocking, while useful, is something that really isn't capturing our 40 under crowd in the way that it used to. Is there some new and creative way that any of your businesses have found long-term to help address our issues? So that is just some of what I think we have tried to address, some of what we have tried to approach. Our long-term challenges, the things that keep me up at night. And in case you're wondering, I haven't slept through a full night in probably a year. So the bald head has just been around for a while, and hair ain't coming back. But so what are the things that keep me up late at night? A few things. One, making sure that we can see a business recovery, particularly as we get into the second and third quarter of 2021. We have very significant financial challenges in Kansas City. So there's both the how do you pay government's bills idea, but then there is also the negative trickle down of what business closures mean to their fellow service providers, et cetera. I also have concerns longer term with consumer behavior. After sitting at our desks for a year, maybe, does that change the nature of interaction we have with being creative in terms of what we see? There still is word of mouth that I think is very important in American business. There continues to be, I think, those that need to share messages and images through traditional manners. That would be foot traffic. Certainly in our shopping districts, the more dense shopping districts, that's an issue. But then also, I think there's a concern with how are you actually creating kind of new markets of activity, even from a geographic basis. We have invested a lot in Kansas City government over the last 25 years in downtown Kansas City. The fact that most of our commercial office space continues to be shuttered while businesses continue on their stay-at-home approach is something that does give us some grave concern, particularly at a time when we're looking to enhance our product of commercial office space, something that I think is necessary for Kansas City long-term from a tax basis, but then also from an economic development basis. Our other issues, I think, that would exist for us long-term just are what does that new kind of world look like? And how do we actually mitigate the effects of COVID-19? In terms of what does the new world look like? Does social distancing remain in such an impact that you will never actually get back the same convention approach, the same entertainment type approach? For the big city in the area, it does become difficult for us to look ahead when so much of our business are shows, games, conferences, events, having people get married in Kansas City, even though they're from Missouri and Kansas more broadly, and making sure that we can service in those areas. And so that is going to be, I think, for us, an idea of how can we plan better? How do we actually do that safe return? And that's something we're working on each and every day. And then finally, making sure we're meeting the moment. And in terms of meeting the moment, a government can or a government cannot. A government that I think has, and I'm not here to get too partisan, I'm just trying to call the shots as I see them. I think it is fair to say that if you look at New York State, although they had a high number of fatalities, the governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, has been able to, through perhaps candor, through those daily press conferences, et cetera, get some level of confidence in the people of New York State to try to address, I think, more directly some of the recovery steps at issue. And so they banned Missourians and Kansans and 30 other states from traveling there. But nevertheless, it gives this confidence that somebody knows what's actually going on. And thus, as we reopen broadly, there'll be somebody who's giving you a safe direction, channeling to consumers that we can go back out as well. That's going to be important for us in Kansas City and in this region. I think another step of importance for us is how are we actually making sure that we're still attractive to investments? For me, that is removing barriers to entry, something I already mentioned before. We should use this moment to reevaluate how easy or how tough it is to do business in Kansas City. Can we open up the permit process? Can we make it faster and easier to rethink our own incentives at a local government level away from just real estate and instead saying, well, are there economic activity tax redirections, sales taxes, and others that we can use to try to stimulate business development that aren't just as simple as, hey, property taxes, let's harm the schools, right? Those are the sorts of things that I think are going to be important for us long-term. That's what we're evaluating. I could talk for a long time, but I'll open up for some questions.
It looks like we already have some questions coming in, Mayor. So thank you for your initial comments. One of our first questions is from Anak, who's one of our students and an engineer, and his question's related to apartments and downtown and all around KCMO. Apartment buildings have been going and going. Do you worry about oversaturating the market?
Short answer is yes. I think we have over-incentivized in particularly the same entry point of space. That is the more luxury market. I think that, we have to remember the goal of incentives, and that is, and we're all old enough to remember malls, although I have a 21-year-old who works in my office, and she has no idea what we did in the 90s for fun or before. But I'm like, Blockbuster Video on a mall, amazing. But nevertheless, what were the malls about, right? You give a break to the anchor tenant because everybody going to Dillard's, right, would then be spending money at the cafeteria and the other shop and what have you. The problem sometimes in the Kansas City model is that we've forgotten that. And so while I greatly commend one of my predecessors of 3 times past, Mayor Kay Barnes, for recognizing that you did need a residential model in some way, and she's absolutely right, you have to make sure that it becomes a sustainable one, and particularly one that isn't so negatively impacting our provision of other services, fire, police services, public works, that we've kind of lost our way. Right now, for every new commercial tower, pardon me, not commercial tower, residential tower in downtown Kansas City, local government spending roughly $27 to $30 million to help subsidize parking. That might have been the loss leader you needed at the very beginning. I do not think it's the sort of thing that can be sustained. I also think that ultimately it distorts our downtown market somewhat. You need mixed income living downtown. You need to make sure you have apartment spaces where the entry-level employee has an opportunity to live there. You know, I talk to lots of people who are in their 20s and early 30s who say, and I ask them, why do you live in suburbs? And no offense if any of you live in suburbs. I hear they're wonderful. I don't go much these days, but they say, you know, well, I can get this wonderful, and I get it. I'm getting a wonderful apartment with a pool and other young people for $850 or $900 in Lee Summit, Overland Park, North Kansas City, whereas my downtown entry point is $1,100, $1,200 or something of that sort. I'm still paying the parking price, et cetera, and you start to create this market challenge. We need to not just subsidize at the luxury level, so we're creating a false market at the luxury point, and instead actually allow for a lot of the redevelopment that I think is in some way organic now in Kansas City to take hold, and thus not oversaturate in one product level. So I guess I would say apartments aren't necessarily oversaturated because residential is fine and good. Where we are creating it in fictitious ways, in a way, is actually a problem for me.
Great. Thank you, Mayor. Andre Davis, who Andre knows everybody, so I assume you may know Andre also. How do you balance your duties as mayor as it relates to stabilizing businesses in the city with making sure our disadvantaged businesses survive this pandemic? I think that's a critical question because even before COVID, the economic recovery of both the Obama administration and the Trump administration left significant portions of our population behind, and those disadvantaged businesses weren't experiencing the same recovery as maybe other bigger big businesses were. So how do you balance that, stabilizing businesses in the city, making sure disadvantaged businesses survive?
There's always the policy approach, and then there's a straight financial approach. I'll start with the latter. The financial approach is recognizing that through any types of subsidy type policies, you should not give an unfair advantage to very large business. Right now, I think it is very problematic to me that in Washington, and this is nothing against the airlines, but you know, we only tend to talk about very large industry sectors and support and bailouts of them. While I understand why we do such things, the too big to fail model, and you're right, this is not just a Trump administration thing, it's an Obama administration, Bush administration type of model, does, I think, create, first of all, it allows sustained inefficiencies at the too big to fail organizations. Now I'm acting like I'm a business professor, which I'm not. But nevertheless, I would think that actually when you look to some of the inefficiencies that were already systemic within our airlines or within our large level banking industry sectors, then I would actually say that, well, you should create more adjustments there before you're actually allowing for subsidies and taxpayer dollars to help support. I understand the theory, which is that without it, you see a problem in lending activity and all of that. But I'll just be honest, because where the question goes. I'm from East Kansas City. We haven't had big bank lending activity in my neighborhood my entire life. So it is not as if support for Bank of America is actually opening up better opportunities for us long term, because that has absolutely never occurred. And so then what is it that we actually need to do? Something Kansas City government has been working on, and this has almost nothing to do with COVID, but we should do it now for years. We have had annually an RFP we issue for our banking business in Kansas City. And I apologize if you're a banking partner of ours with Kansas City government, because you may be like, that Lucas is going crazy. But nevertheless, in every RFP, what we have tried to say, or we've discussed, without, I think, compelling it in the way necessary, how do we actually try to require more socially progressive banking, in the sense that if you're doing business with Kansas City, if we invest $1 billion for you, you will take affirmative steps, not unlike our CRA grant activity with federal government policy, to invest and to lend for businesses that are historically disadvantaged. And come from areas that are historically disadvantaged in our city. And I won't actually say that's not just a race issue. That is something that speaks to small businesses, that speaks to areas where we've had disinvestment for decades now. The Ruskin Heights area, South Kansas City is a story I continue to be concerned with. And that's the sort of, I think, sustained policy change that we can do beyond just getting money to businesses to the fullest extent that we can, which is something I care about too.
I would be remiss if I didn't put a plug in that it's part of the Bloch School's mission and vision also to ensure businesses thrive, and that we help alleviate the disadvantaged, the gap that exists between the advantaged and disadvantaged businesses in Kansas City. So it's something I know Brian Anderson and I and the dean have talked a lot about how we can do better at Bloch School doing that also. So we're here to help, Mayor.
Absolutely.
A question coming in from Dave Pullen, and he makes a point that businesses oftentimes become leaders in times like this, in divisive times, in times of political division. A prime example is large box stores voluntarily discontinuing the selling of assault-style rifles in the face of increased mass shootings. What do you see are the primary areas of social need that you feel the KC business community can take the lead in addressing? And in particular, what are the specific actions and tactics you see being most impactful coming from the business community?
If I were, I've been doing a bunch of Zooms with UMKC these days. So I think on this one, I may go with a controversial answer somewhat. Changing the focus from cheerleading to leadership, which is a hard one. And what do I mean by that? Don't get me wrong. I'm not shirking my duty as a leader. The activities of the business community in recent years, and it's what we in government have asked them to do, have been, hey, everybody, get behind us on an airport. Yeah. Hey, everybody, get behind us on X or Y, big, totally uncontroversial project, totally uncontroversial discussion. Okay. And that's wonderful. And I'm about that too. But what I need beyond business telling me that streetcar is great and the airport's great and all of that is, because I can intuitively understand it too, and I think we can sell that to the public, is, all right, how do we actually meet the moment? And when I say meet the moment, if you're looking at all of the racial related protests and you think that it is merely about policing, then we're missing the boat entirely. And don't get me wrong, there's lots that needs to be done with Kansas City Police Department, and we can make this whole moment about them, and it would break my heart. Because as I say all the time, if in 6 months, the police chief's gone and they've recalled Quinton Lucas and everything else is just kind of doing what it is, and we've changed nothing substantially, then I would say it's been a waste. What we need to do is say, how do we actually create more opportunities for people? How do we actually let people know that there are opportunities in this society? The problem right now in so many of our communities is that, and I know this and I see this when I talk to different school groups, and it is amazing because I will go to your most expensive high school in this city, and then I will go to a high school that's free, first of all, but also where the students, when we had our COVID shutdown, stopped showing up because, and this is East High School, for example, and the principal told me because a lot of kids were starting to go back to work. And they said, why would I go to school? I can work at a restaurant or work at this store, do that sort of thing. And that's going to be cooler to me than being on a Zoom for the rest of my junior year. We need to let people know how there are sustained opportunities for them in business. I think we need to sell in a way what this city's business community is doing. I think to embrace people from different backgrounds, from different areas, from different cultures. I think we need to make sure that business leadership is not silent in a lot of the social conversations we're having. And by the way, that does not just mean the Greater Kansas City Chamber or the Civic Council. It can be any organizations in which you're members. It can be any groups that are saying, look, we want to help out. We don't give a darn who's elected to this job or that job or who runs this or that. We want to let a kid know that, hey, do you want to shadow virtually our business for a day? Or do you want to actually create more opportunities for consumers in a different part of the community? That's the sort of thing I want to know about. I'll give you an example. And I shouldn't let y'all this into my business, but whatever else. Something not rare for brothers in particular, right? Shaving, you get the razor burns here, all that sort of stuff, right? And all these different things. And my barber used to tell me all this stuff. Somebody told me you should go to a dermatologist for it. I'm like, I've never been to a dermatologist. We're a dermatologist. That's for, like, you know, white folks who get sunburns and all that sort of stuff. And, you know, and teenagers. So I go to one and it was wonderful. And I talked to this dermatologist and they're like, oh yeah, we've got a thing for this. Happens all the time. You know, and then later he's talking to me and he was like, actually, I'm trying to reach out to more African Americans with dermatology because not enough of y'all wear sunscreen, guilty as well. And there are all these types of issues that we could help avoid. Huh, interesting, right? It's this sort of thing where if you understand where your business can expand, where it can grow, and that was kind of on him. Then I think those are more ways that we can be helpful. There's a service he can provide to a community, and there's a community that might need some of this dermatologist services. Those are the sorts of things when you just put yourself out there a bit more, where I think we can make a difference. I'm sorry, I'm long-winded on every answer, but I'm happy this morning.
Oh, it's great. It was great. It's a great example too. Geraldine Cotta wrote in, the competition is good. We understand that. I think it's kind of born into us here. How are you working to get along with other city governments so we can learn and grow from COVID together?
You know, and I make it sound like we're all in a constant battle of cities, and we're not. We largely get along. The city's a lot better than any other level of government, frankly. And so the way we, you know, tend to agree is that we first just talk. We try to talk on an interesting and frequent level, and sometimes we agree, sometimes we don't. Early on in the COVID crisis here in the metro area, we all agreed, and then not unlike the Beatles breaking up or any of your favorite bands, you know, we saw different political issues and different political challenges. In Kansas City, Missouri, the mayor gets to issue orders about masks and size limits and all of that. In Johnson County, the health director does it, but that can be rescinded by a vote of the Johnson County Commission. And it seems as if every vote of the Johnson County Commission lately has been 4-3. Interesting, you know? And so that tells me that the more aggressive they get, the more challenges they might have. And so I think we try to basically keep people in the loop. You try to stay informed, and then you try to share good ideas. You know, I'm on a text message chain that got me on the 3rd hour of the Today Show, which I've learned more people watch than I actually ever knew, with other Black mayors throughout mainly the South. And it was very interesting because, like, early in the COVID crisis, we would all just kind of have texts and say, hey, has anybody got a capacity limit? Has anybody issued a curfew in your city? And it's really just sharing that information that you can work together. So it's not just kind of pure competition.
Do you have a specific mayor or two that you work a lot with or talk to pretty regularly that you've become friendly with?
You know, I have. First, I'm going to start off sad, then it'll get happier. On the local level, there was not a more decent and kinder man in this metro than the former mayor of Olathe, Michael Copeland. For those who are not Olathans or don't make it to Southwest Johnson County, not only was he part of this transition in Olathe from it being the land of haphazard at Sunflower Dodge and Olathe, to it being a place where you saw amazing business and residential growth. And when I got elected mayor of Kansas City, you know, there were a lot of other mayors in Johnson County and elsewhere who see the need for more competition, particularly in the commercial office world and that sort of thing. He did not. And he reached out and was very helpful. He passed away maybe a month ago now, or a month and a half ago. And you know, we miss him greatly. I think this metro does. Beyond the Kansas City metro, certainly worked with the city of St. Louis a lot just because of our shared status in the state. Politics are a little easier here than there. I've also built up a relationship with the mayor of Detroit, Mike Duggan. Detroit was interesting for me for this reason. Every year, the chamber and a lot of other organizations, but I'll spotlight the chamber on this. You know, they'll do these comparative study city trips, and we always basically go to places that feel like going to Disney World, right? You go to Nashville and you say, oh my God, look at all the cranes. Or you go to Denver and say, look at all the marijuana money. And I say, well, you know, I want to look at a place that has problems like mine. How do you fill up, you know, acres and acres of vacant lots? How do you fix historic segregation patterns? How do you build a business community where there is a tremendous amount of violent crime? And so I managed to add a Chiefs game to it. So went up to Detroit for Chiefs Lions last year and visited with the mayor, visited with folks in the business community and development, in creative services, in sports, and really got to, I think, build somewhat of a partnership, because Detroit is larger than Kansas City. The metro is about 4 million people. The city of Detroit only has about 750,000 now, down from 2 million back in the late 1960s, which is shocking. But, you know, seeing where they're actually doing population stabilization was something important for me. So to answer the question, I get a lot from Detroit. And by the way, before you all run off and say, like some of my recallers might say, Lucas is taking us to the gutter and just following Detroit's lead. I think you share good and bad. Isn't that the best thing? Like, for those of you who are parents out there, and I got 8 nieces and nephews, so I hear about it, right? The parents who tell you their children are perfect, isn't that so unhelpful, right? Whereas the ones who actually tell you, yeah, my kid had this challenge for years and years. Yes, they get past it, or this, that, or the other, or, you know, it's actually helpful. And that's how I think cities can do better, if we share our problems, not just Kansas City, most amazing place ever.
As a parent and a baseball coach of an 8-year-old team, I will tell you it's not helpful for parents who keep their kids do nothing wrong.
Right.
So I'm going to preempt it. I'm going to, I guess, have a caveat to this first question, that I do have a consulting relationship with the Royals, so I will not weigh in on this question. You probably know where it's going already. Discussions of potentially building a new baseball stadium downtown. There's been a lot of conversation about project being funded by tax dollars versus by the people who own the baseball team. What is your perspective? That's from Joanna Doe, one of our students.
Yeah. You know, it's always sad when you give too funny a quote to the newspaper, because they will use it against you for years. So when I was running for mayor, I said we need a new downtown baseball stadium like I need a new Maserati. It's great to have, but I just don't have the money. You know, that doesn't mean that one day I won't have the money, right? I mean, I would actually like to. It won't be in this job. But I think the reason I said it that way was to suggest that how one finances it is actually, to me, going to be the important way to do it. I would like a downtown baseball stadium. Actually, and look, I'm not breaking news, and so people have already speculated on this property. Over my shoulder here at City Hall is the East Village. If you come downtown, you see between Interstate 29, 35, whatever, on the east side, and basically all the way to City Hall and police headquarters, there are lots of vacant parcels, large enough for a downtown baseball project. This was the East Village project started by Mayor Barnes. We've never really had stimulated development there, so you have a space there. You also have a space on the north end of downtown, which is basically tons of parking lots, that sort of thing. Cities that are on their game have downtown baseball stadiums. It helps you link business. It helps you link, frankly, I think, more residential, office, other opportunities nearby. It builds density, which is a good thing, Kansas City. And I think that it is something, I think it is a direction we're going. I would predict that within 15 years, there will be construction started on a new downtown baseball stadium in Kansas City. The devil is, of course, within the details. The devil in the details is, how is it funded? I prefer, you know, God bless the Kansas City Royals. If their ownership group can fund it themselves, kind of like the Dallas Cowboys did down in Arlington, well, you know, maybe we'll hook you up with a tax break, but that'd be great. That'd be very different than how things have been done in Kansas City with other stadium projects. And so I think that's where the real discussion is going to be. If it's not funded exclusively privately, then I would certainly look to a bi-state related tax on it. I think we've asked the voters in Jackson County and Kansas City proper to fund a lot of our civic assets. I don't think they can alone anymore. And so those would be the directions I think we'd need to go.
So I know that you have a very, very busy schedule today, and we want to be conscious of your time. So we'll start our wrap up now. Did you have any? I'm gonna ask one final question, because she used to work at City Hall, and I don't, and she also works for our chancellor, Kamiko Gilmore, in regards to the city manager search. I think this is actually a really important question. We'll make this the last one. What are your expectations as it relates to KC Economic Development Corporation as the city's economic development arm?
A few things. So there are some who need to be cheerleaders, and that is the EDC. I think that one of the challenges with Kansas City government over the last 4 years was that the EDC, well, I'll just be kind of blunt. I think the city manager, perhaps to his credit, was actually the one who was finalizing and completing a lot of our deals and the deal structure. And then the EDC was kind of used as a more administrative arm to do the work and figure it out after. So business, meet with city manager, deal done, and then, all right, EDC, go do your follow-on part. The problem is if you get too much expertise as being kind of the behind-the-scenes scrivener, then I think you are missing out on those opportunities, frankly, to do some of the stuff we talked about today. To Clifton's question, and Clifton, you have amazing hair. How do we actually find some way to reach out and prepare for future business trends, right? That's in some ways the work of an economic development agency. That's, to me, the work of an agency that's saying, okay, we're not just giving property tax breaks anymore, because each one is incredibly hard to do, and it's really unpopular, and nobody wants to build a 30-story residential tower right now. Actually, they probably do. Nobody wants to build a 30-story commercial office building right now. And we need to pivot. And I think the importance of the future of the Economic Development Corporation in Kansas City is actually finding out where we are in that pivoting, looking to go back to another question, looking to what are trends in other cities. How do we actually still, even though we're not having big conferences and conventions, and we're not even thinking about being in the same space, how do we build, in some ways, that creative environment and economy that is so important for the city? It's not necessarily that we are Austin or Northern California or the Boston region, but how do we, in our part of the country, really build and attract that in a really unique and special way? Is it the EDC hosting a virtual conference of some sort for businesses of a certain type? Is it the EDC helping us write that responsible banking ordinance so our lenders are encouraged to lend in areas of historic disadvantage, and the Economic Development Corporation is giving that level of direction? Really, I want them to just do a lot more. And to say that, not that I want this from our next city manager, but if our city manager shows up and says, hey, I'm going to focus on the roads, fixing the pensions, everything else, and that's what my job is, but EDC, I'm going to trust you to really stimulate business, and that's good. And if the mayor and the council are off doing who knows what and fighting at each other and yelling at each other over $20, which we do every other week, then we're that, but we still have business getting done in Kansas City. Having all these boards and commissions in Kansas City is not supposed to actually slow us down, which is exactly what it does. What it's really supposed to do is to say that if you've got a mayor who, let's use a good UMKC alum like Mark Funkhauser, who, God bless Mayor Funkhauser, if he's somebody who maybe isn't getting along with everyone, we can still get things done. That's what we really need to get back to. And I think that's the important thing, and the way I want to leave the institution that I have the fortune of being mayor for.
Well, we're eternally grateful for the time you've given us today. I'm from Baltimore originally. I've always said Kansas City is the greatest place I've ever lived, and largely it's because people like you making time for the community in a way I haven't seen it in other cities. So it really is a rare place to live, and we're lucky to have you representing us right now. So thank you, Mayor.
Hey, thank you all so much. Have a great day. Goodbye, everybody.